y'all, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we're bringing you another episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? So today we're going to be talking about a hot topic, how to relocate here to Raleigh. So when I say Raleigh, I am talking about the entire triangle, but Raleigh being our capital city and kind of the starting point for most people, we're going to talk about relocating to our main city here. So there are a couple of things you need to consider when you're choosing to come to the city. Now, there are, of course, folks who are moving here because their job has transplanted them or their family lives here, and so there's just that draw for a different reason. But we do work with a lot of people who just the weather is a big driver, or they've just always loved the South, and Raleigh seems to be a really strong market, and so they kind of plant themselves here as a starting point. So whatever your reason is, here are 7 things to think about when you're relocating to our city. The first thing is just talking about specific locations. So as I mentioned earlier, the triangle is much larger than just Raleigh proper. We have multiple counties, not just Wake County, which is definitely the biggest. There's lots of secondary counties that people wind up in because we're the triangle. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. So lots of big drivers in multiple directions. But something that you really need to be aware of is the fact that most of our towns here in Wake County cross county lines. So when you say you want to live in Garner, which county do you want to live in? Or is it that specific town and location is really the draw? So just be aware of that map and those lines. The second big thing that I often ask folks who have school-age children is the school search. So Wake County Public Schools is literally the largest school system in the Southeast. So that's obviously something to consider based on where you're coming from. In Wake County, it's school of choice. There's lots of options, including different types of schools, traditional, year-round, lots of calendar options. We have charter, we have magnet, we have private. You also have base school maps that you can then apply and go to other schools. And then, of course, you throw the cap schools and all of that malarkey in there, and it just becomes a little overwhelming and complex, right? So as somebody who was a teacher for 14 years here in the county, I can definitely assist in creating that base map and kind of figuring out where our starting point is. But there's a lot of huge questions that we have to ask to kind of hone in and narrow down. And there's lots of great information we can provide to make that a little bit smoother of marrying up school search and real estate search. The third thing is make sure you're taking advantage of virtual showings. So something our team definitely likes to do is also walk you through the interior of the house, which is obviously super important. That's where you're going to be living. But we need to take a look at the exterior, the neighborhood, look at aerial footage. There's a lot of things that we can kind of glean that's really important for you if you're not physically going to be here. Most folks can't come in one weekend and find the house. It statistically is pretty unlikely. However, it does happen. But for most people who are relocating here, there's a lot of things that we have to do in a virtual capacity, meaning you're relying on your agent. So hopefully you vetted them, you trust them, you like them. Maybe they were even recommended from somebody you know, like, and trust. So that feature and that facet of the process, those virtual showings, can actually really help in making a final decision. The fourth thing you need to look at is drive time versus distance. So what's really interesting about our travel space here is that you could go east 10 miles and it's one number of minutes in distance. And then you could go 5 miles and it's the exact same travel time. So you do need to be aware that our DOT is, rapidly working on trying to expand all our local highway systems because we continue to grow at such a substantial pace. However, there are a lot of big projects that are still in flux and being finished. For example, I-540 is a huge roadway here. So that's our outer belt line. We have 2, the inner being 440, the outer being 540. 540 is still being continued and finished at this point. So 2 things to consider is, do you rely on that roadway to get to where you need to go? And second of all, are you buying a house that's now going to be in the path of where they're expanding? Because you may end up dealing with construction traffic or even noise in the long term that you weren't prepared for when you bought. The next thing is proximity to the airport. So a lot of folks who are coming here for business relocations, one of the big features that we have to pay attention to is how close they are to RDU. Another thing to think about is the flight path itself. So while you want to be close to the airport, do you want to live under that flight path and hear the airplanes going over? Obviously, there's different decibel ranges where, in some capacities, it feels like you're on a military base and your house is literally shaking from, the air traffic above. And then there's other ones where, you see a plane on occasion, you don't really hear it, you're not really paying attention to it. But everybody has a different level of sensitivity to that. So I would highly recommend checking that map to make sure you're not in that flight flight path. Obviously, this is also a disclosure that should be attached in MLS. The next thing is, if you can, plan a trip. One of the biggest things that I think people need to do is visit and just kind of get to know people here. So a huge thing that I recommend if there's time is, if you feel like there's a certain place for you, like you really want to be in Holly Springs, go to a couple grocery stores in Holly Springs and just talk to people. Go to coffee shops, go to places where people are more likely to sit down and just kind of give you their feedback. Take everything with a grain of salt, but I will say that's actually how I've had clients decide whether or not a location was right for them. It's just talking to people and getting their experience and their take on how things work in that locale. The last thing, and this is again, take it with a grain of salt, potentially join a couple of Facebook groups. There are actually some really large ones here and then some smaller, very hyper local ones that I would recommend, where you can ask these questions about what it's like to live, work, and play in these locations, or what the traffic's like, or what's been somebody's experience in the schools. Because something that your real estate agent cannot do is talk about crime statistics. Is it a safe area? Is it a good school? Is it family friendly? Is it walking distance? There are things that violate fair housing, and we have to tread very lightly in crossing that line. But there's obviously good resources that can be provided that can kind of help you figure it out for yourself. So Facebook groups are definitely a good starting point. So hopefully this has provided a good starter little list of places that you can go for information, so that when you relocate to the Triangle, you feel educated, in the know, and more prepared to make this decision for you or for your family. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. Please be sure to like, share, and follow, and drop us a comment if you have any additional questions. We'll see you next time.